Hello. I'm very happy to be to speak to you today about what is a very important topic. It's understanding the health risks of 5G technologies. I know we've got other things on our mind at the moment with the global pandemic, but that too will pass, and we will still be left with the implications of our wireless technologies in the environment, both for ourselves and our children. I'm a professor of information systems. My focus is on R&D on artificial intelligence technologies, primarily for regulatory risk and other uses within the financial industry. But I also have a deep interest in technology risk. And to that end, I've been collaborating with and part of a network of international scientists who are looking at the health risks posed by wireless technologies, of which 5G is a part. Now, there's been a lot of attention in the media about this, but the old Russian saying, there is no truth in the news and no news in the truth, is never more apt today. You look at the reporting on conspiracy theories around 5G, health scares, and so on. The health issues are real, they're not scares. It is unfortunate that journalists today, whether they're technology journalists and even science journalists, aren't educated adequately either in the philosophy of science or the scientific method. Because if they were, they wouldn't be reporting, for example, as The Guardian has been, and in particular, its more recent piece just this month on 5G confirmed safe by radiation watchdog. If anybody took the trouble to dig into the activities of this so-called watchdog, you know, big question marks would be raised over the safety not only of 5G, but also of 2G, 3G, 4G, and Wi-Fi. Because there are, as we'll see, thousands of studies which give lie to the claim that these technologies are safe. And the truth is, and these are just three papers, one just published this year, the second published last year, and the third is actually a study commissioned by Deutsche Telekom. Now, these studies are unequivocal, the first two, at least the toxicology letter study and the study in the International Journal of Hygiene and Environmental Health, and they come from respected scientists and medical practitioners, and their findings are unequivocal, and the findings are based on reviews, in one case, of thousands of studies from the gold standard database of scientific publications in medicine. And the industry study, which you see here, is one that has been conducted on the extremely high frequencies that are planned to be used in 5G and 6G and beyond. And these are millimeter wave frequencies. And it is interesting that this study highlights that there are only two scientific peer-reviewed studies on the use of millimeter wave technology that is going to be deployed in the UK in the near future. Two studies, and both those studies find negative biological effects. Now, that is surprising and it's worrying. So what we've got is we've got a hidden truth here. I'm using the iceberg analogy simply because what we're getting is the 20% of the entire story. And governments, regulators, the industry, well, it's the industry who are driving this primarily. And this organization called the International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection, ICNIRP, we shall call it, is based in Munich, is in an international closed shop of scientists. You can only gain entry to this group of 15 scientists if you're of a like mind. And as we'll see, they are heavily compromised because they've got links with industry. The incoming chair of our ICNIRP, you would think that he would be an epidemiologist or somebody that would understand from a professional capacity the health effects of non-ionizing radiation, but he is actually a professor of psychology in Australia. So, there are significant issues here and questions that need to be raised about this group. And as I'll demonstrate, they are trusted by the UK government, by Public Health in England, and just about every other government as being the golden source of scientific information about the health risks, and they're anything but. In fact, they are only a minority view, because the majority of scientists and the majority of research findings find non-thermal risks. And what I mean by that is that the safety guidelines that were referenced in The Guardian earlier on find only and protect against only thermal or heating effects, much like you would have in your microwave. They totally ignore the existence of non-thermal effects. And we'll see what those are in a minute. So let's look at one of the major risks here. And it certainly isn't one of the most long identified. In 1976, the US Naval Medical Research Institute identified non-thermal effects that range from depression to neurodegenerative diseases and so on in 3,700 studies. This was 1976, and this was the US government, and this was the US Navy. However, since then, radio frequency radiation of the type used in 5G has been identified by the World Health Organizations as a possible carcinogen. It is also, and we know this for a long time, toxinogenic. And you would think that this would be of interest to governments and the industry, but not a single peer-reviewed scientific study has been carried out on the health risks associated with 5G. However, there are thousands of peer-reviewed studies that identify the health risks from 2 to 4G and Wi-Fi technologies. So what are the non-thermal effects? Now, if you look at the right-hand side of the screen, they're listed here. So there are general health impacts like lower sperm count and sperm quality, and indeed a significant drop in male fertility is being linked with males carrying their mobile phones in their pockets. It's been linked with immune dysfunction, cardiovascular effects, miscarriage, significant studies carried out in this, asthma, and issues with the blood-brain barrier, which are very disturbing. In terms of cancer, a range of gliomas, meningiomas, acoustic neuromas, and salivary gland tumors have been identified in the literature. And there are a range of neuropsychiatric effects which are linked with radiofrequency radiation of the non-ionizing type. And these range from Alzheimer's to cognitive processing effects, altered brain development, sleep disturbance, headache, I could go on. They're all there, and they're in the literature. So one would ask the question: how can your government and public health in England deem this to be safe, these technologies to be safe? You'll see to the right-hand side of the screen the mechanisms that produce these outcomes. It is worth noting, in actual fact, one step back there, and I've noted that these radiofrequency radiation is a co-carcinogen. In other words, its presence with other carcinogens increases their efficacy. In other words, it doesn't make recovery from cancer any better. In actual fact, it affects one's ability to recover from cancers, and it increases the likelihood that one will get cancer if one is exposed to cancers. So I'll return to the mechanisms in a later slide. So I made mention of the scientific consensus on the health risks. Now, one of the most important studies that have been carried out, and it was a 10-year study. It was anything up to $30 million. It was called for by the Food and Drug Administration in 1999. It was late in its execution. It was carried out by the US National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, National Toxicology Program, which is part of the US Department of Health. And they found clear evidence that radiofrequency radiation is carcinogenic. And here's a quote on the review of research in relation to 5G technology. And the NTP feels that the available findings seem sufficient to demonstrate the existence of biomedical effects to invoke the precautionary principle, to define exposed subjects as potentially vulnerable, and to revise existing limits. So, and what we're being exposed to here, by the way, and the health risks kick in at levels that are at least 100 times lower than the Public Health England and IRCNIRP safety guidelines. And indeed, the European Academy for Environmental Medicine, EMF guidelines, indicates non-thermal safety levels of between 1 million and 100 million times less than Public Health England and IRCNIRP guidelines. In terms of its carcinogenic properties, non-ionizing radiation of the type that is 5G is a class 2B carcinogen. And it was classified thus in 2011. However, you can see there have been many studies conducted which demonstrate that it causes or is linked with a range of various cancers. Indeed, a study conducted in the UK indicated that brain cancer in the UK, particular type of gliomas, they're a very worrying tumor that occurs in the temporal lobes and the frontal lobes of the human brain, and the incidence of these tumors has increased 3 times since the mid-90s. 3 times. And that's significant because these cancers are very rare and they're very difficult to cure, and they've got a high mortality rate. So a majority of scientists now consider there's enough evidence for it, and that is radiofrequency radiation, to be reclassified as a class 1 carcinogen. However, last year, in March 2019, based on mounting evidence from hundreds of new studies, a WHO advisory group of 29 scientists from 18 countries recommended that non-ionizing radiation be prioritized by the International Agency for Research in Cancer over the next 5 years. Why? Because they believe it to be either a class 2A or a class 1 carcinogen. In other words, it isn't safe in its current classification. But the 15 scientists from IRCNIP are of the opinion that that's safe. How can that be? Well, you can see at the bottom left, right-hand side of the slide here, my thoughts on that. So you would ask, how can we prove this? How do we know? What have the studies shown? What are the mechanisms? And when it boils down to it, it's quite simple. Exposure to non-ionizing radiation increases the free radicals or reactive oxygen species in cells in the human body. It also has the effect of reducing the levels of antioxidants in cells in the human body, particularly cells of the central nervous system, but in just about any organ that is exposed. And the combination here of an increase in ROS and a decrease in antioxidants increases oxidative stress and mitochondrial damage in cells. Now, cells repair themselves, where we generate these ROS and we create antioxidants in order to maintain a balance through natural activities, normal activities, but increasingly our environment is full of, or presents us with a range of toxins. And so our bodies, our cells, are under increasing environmental stress. There's an increase in ROS, a decrease in antioxidants, which leads to oxidative stress. And when our cells go into oxidative stress and we can't repair them, it increases the probability of cell dysfunction. And what that means is that the incidences that have been looked at in terms of electrosensitivity and depression, and on into very serious conditions like neurodegenerative disorders and Alzheimer's, are all part of a causal chain or links over time. There's effects on neurotransmitters and neuroendocrine hormones, all of which add to this toxic cocktail of effects that have been identified by scientists. And of course, in terms of cancer, DNA molecules are altered through the existence of free radicals and oxidative stress, and that has been proven in hundreds of studies right across a range of toxic substances, of which radiofrequency radiation is just one. Now my studies in risk, there's one thing: frequency and duration of exposure to environmental toxins over time increases the risk of biological effects and health ill effects. Remember, our body can repair itself. We can recover, but if the frequency is high and the duration is long, then it increases the risk of health ill effects. And when you think about it, and here's the problem with 5G, radio frequency radiation is really ubiquitous today. We get it from our mobile phones, our smartphones, our Wi-Fi devices, our routers in our home, routers in the workplace, access points, and a web of antennae across the built environment. And the devices nearest exposes to what's known as near field exposure. And the antennae outside our homes and in the built environment exposes to far-field sources. And I mentioned earlier on the National Toxicology Program study, which looked at near-field exposure to rats, but there is another study at the same time, no less intensive and no less controversial, but no less clear in its findings, in that far-field radiation induces the same health ill effects as near-field radiation. And that is, unfortunately, significant and has significant implications for our environment as 5G is being rolled out. So what we've done over a very, very short period of time is we've created an environment that's awash with electromagnetic signals, that is radio frequency radiation, of all frequencies, and it's putting our bodies and those of our children under significant stress. So, and this will result, and what I mean by stress here, of course, is oxidative stress at the cellular level. And it exposes us to all of the health risks listed earlier. This is a logical conclusion. So why doesn't the UK government act to protect the public? You would think, well, one can only think of the past number of weeks when the UK government wished to confer herd immunity on the population by not taking the precautions that were being taken and had been taken in China, but also in two countries not directly affected, and that's Singapore and Hong Kong. And even though they have large population densities, the incidence and prevalence and mortality rate from COVID-19 is pretty low, because they began to take the type of precautions which their scientists deemed to, and which the World Health Organization deemed to be necessary. However, the UK government was extremely slow, and it was saying that it was pointing to its scientific evidence, which went against the vast majority of scientific opinion, both in the UK and also internationally. So when you look at 5G and radio frequency radiation, we see pretty much the same thing. Public Health England placed their trust in URCNIP, and two studies it conducted using the advisory group on non-ionizing radiation protection. And these were published in 2012 and 2017, but significantly, URCNIP scientists constituted 30% of the 18-member UK committee. So here you had scientists who designed safety guidelines in 1998 on a review committee to review its own guidelines. And in no other regulated sector or area of business activity would this be acceptable from a governance perspective, and it is a conflict of interest. And so ACNIR's findings still influence Public Health England's thinking on this matter. And as you saw earlier, URCNIP also published its most recent guidelines, to include 5G, by the way, just this year. And I've studied them very closely, and there's very little difference between the 2020 guidelines and the 1998 guidelines. In actual fact, in many cases, they loosen the safety limitations on exposures, and they take absolutely no real cognizance of the health risks to children. It's, to my mind, is absolutely scandalous. So as I pointed out, the 1998 guidelines are virtually unchanged in 2020. And the guidelines focus only on technical issues and present safety recommendations only on thermal effects, the heating effects. And as with the 1998 guidelines, and as with everything that IRCNIP does, it ignores or denies the existence of non-thermal effects on adults and children. Now, IRCNIP also contaminated, and I'm not alone in saying that, the EU Scientific Committee on Emerging and Newly Identified Health Risks Committee. In actual fact, both now are effectively industry captured organizations. They're using the same tried and tested approach to discounting, dismissing, and excluding peer-reviewed scientific evidence on pretty arbitrary grounds. And it's also the case that those 15 IRCNIP scientists are members of WHO. And it's one of the reasons why the WHO is conflicted in many ways, because it has the International Agency for Research in Cancer, which is coming out and saying these things are carcinogenic, and on the other hand is saying, okay, everything is okay because it's been influenced excessively by IRCNIP. And there's been lots of studies in this, and they're well acknowledged conflicts of interest due to their close ties with industry, and this fact was recognized by an Italian appeal court judgment, and it was reviewing an appeal against a finding against a company in Italy whose workers were exposed to RFR from their radio frequency radiation from the mobile phones, and one of them presented with a rare form of brain cancer, and the courts found that the individual's exposure to radio frequency radiation was responsible. Now, the appeal court ruled that the research reviews, and this includes the 1998 guidelines and everything associated with it, and its current guidelines, you could almost say, that these research reviews carried out by IRCNIP were biased and could not be trusted in determining whether there was a causal link between wireless cell phone use and brain cancer. So on the right-hand side here, you'll see the Commission and its constitution, and you'll see Professor Rodney Croft from the University of Wollongong in Australia will be the incoming chair, and his area of expertise is in health psychology, which is kind of interesting. So if you take the majority view and the minority view, so you have over 250 scientists globally, quite apart from those scientists in the advisory group to the WHO, requesting the United Nations to introduce a moratorium on 5G against 15 scientists saying there's nothing wrong. Now, to my mind, that's problematic. So when you look at recent epidemiological research, and I had reason to write a critique in the last number of weeks on a recent report by the US Food and Drug Administration. It was a research review, an anonymous research review written by a US government agency. None of its researchers saw fit to put their names to the report, and it was claiming that there was that the epidemiological research, and again it used pretty much the same techniques as the IRCNIP community in discounting hundreds of studies in order to focus on those which supported its central thesis, which was that there was little or no health ill effects, and there was a big question mark over existing research. In other words, it was placing great doubt. But it did not include 13 studies which have been published over the last 2 years, which do find significant links between radio frequency, radiation exposure from cell phones and wireless, and the incidence of various cancers. Now, you take the first bullet point here, and this comes from 2 US economists, and it was only published last year. And they looked over, 25 years of, of, of mobile phone subscriptions across 25 countries. Or was it 20 years in 25 countries? Apologies. But in any case, they found a positive and statistically significant link between the death rates from brain cancer and exposure to mobile phone radiation through, and they were using mobile phone contracts as a means of, as an analog for exposure. And the control cases, they looked at other types of cancers and their increase, and they found that there was in their mind, that there was a significant link between mobile phone use and exposure to radio frequency radiation and brain cancer 15 to 20 years later. And that's not alone. You see, I made mention here of the US Center for Disease Control finding that non-Hodgkin's lymphomas, CNS tumors, including brain cancers and various other cancers, have increased recently among adolescent Americans. Now, what's the causal factor here? What's the common thing here? The Lancet Neurology reports CNS cancer is responsible for a substantial morbidity and mortality worldwide, and the incidence has increased between 1990 and 2016. There's scientific evidence that RFR from cell phones is increasing or triggering brain cancer in young women who carry the devices on or near their breasts. So there is significant evidence out there that there is an environmental toxin, which we're all being exposed to, which is increasing cancer rates, particularly cancers of the central nervous system globally. Now, why is that? What are we being exposed to? And the only common thing, since we've been cleaning up the environment over the last 20 odd years significantly, is exposure to radio frequency radiation. You look at the right-hand side of this particular screen, and you see that US healthcare provider Kaiser Permanente and its scientist Dr. Dae-Kun Lee believes that the increase in brain tumors is worrisome. However, the increase in colorectal cancers among young people is even more troubling. And there have been several studies, right, in the US and Europe, which have identified a significant increase in colorectal cancers in young people. Now, this is an old person's disease. So why is this happening? Dr. Dae-Kun Lee believes that it's because of where young people carry their phones in their front and back pockets of their jeans and pants. So that's when we look at our children and how they carry and use their mobile phones, this is deeply, deeply troubling. But what we're faced with really, and what I started off with in the second slide, in indicating the way the media is being manipulated, or else is complicit due to a lack of knowledge and ignorance. And you can see here two books by David Michaels, two studies. And David Michaels is a professor and he's a healthcare scientist, and he worked for the Obama administration in that capacity. And he's been studying how industry, right across various sectors, are burying the scientific reality in terms of scientific studies on the effects of a variety of environmental toxins on human beings. And those of you who were able to go to the cinema in recent times might have seen the movie Dark Waters about the activities of DuPont. And other researchers and scientists have been doing likewise, like your own Ben Goldacre, I read Bad Science years ago. It influenced my thinking greatly. And it demonstrated how pharmaceutical companies distort the results and hide and even falsify the results of scientific studies on their drugs in order to get them on the market. And so that there is absolute no duty of care by industry in any sector to the populace. And the telecom industry is exactly the same, and it's no different. So why you need to act? Governments and policymakers are, to my mind, being clearly misled by EarthNet, which has been influenced by the industry, or else they're turning a blind eye for economic reasons related to national and digital transformation strategies. Now, we have no more clear current evidence of what governments are capable of doing than the declaration by Donald Trump that he wants to open up or reopen the US economy in 2 weeks' time, irrespective of the fact that the scientific opinion globally is that it will take months before we're able to do that, and the US in particular is able to do that. So economic concerns trump public health concerns. And the US press and media are complicit in this because of their tendency to sensationalize public concerns on one hand, focus on conspiracy theories which have no ground whatsoever, and because of the rise of false news and Facebook, they're failing to conduct proper investigative journalism. That's a simple fact of the matter. And journalists also fail to question the credentials, competencies, and possible conflicts of interest of selected experts whom they quote. I recently won a case against the Irish Times that I took against them to the Press Ombudsman, which is a statutory body in Ireland to protect the public from falsehoods and inaccuracies being published in the press. And it was in relation to an article by William J. Broad that was first published in the New York Times, and he would be a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, but he published falsehoods and inaccuracies about the health ill effects of 5G. And he's not alone in that. And I have an upcoming case, unless they publish a rebuttal against a major British newspaper in this also. So inaccurate and false news and reporting in almost all media. And the BBC is particularly bad here. The Guardian, in fairness, has one or two articles, but it in recent times it's been consistently one-sided in reporting the minority view against the overwhelming body of scientific opinion. And for the life of me, I can't understand why it's been doing that. So all of this is serious. When you're at home, self-isolating, in quarantine, or in, social distancing over the coming weeks and months, you need to think about this hard. To be sure, our devices will help us keep connected over the coming weeks and months, help connect us with our grandchildren, wherever they may be, and our children. But we must also realize that there's no free lunch when it comes to anything we do in life. There's no free lunch where technology is concerned. So I'll leave you with those thoughts. Thank you very much.